Unidentified. My Top UFO Cases by Hector V. Bello, March 2018. The 1950 Paul Trent UFO sighting in Oregon, USA. This incident is also known as the McMinnville UFO photographs. The McMinnville UFO photographs were taken on a farm near McMinnville, Oregon, United States in 1950. The photos were reprinted in Life magazine and in newspapers across the nation, and are often considered to be among the most famous ever taken of an UFO. UFO skeptics have concluded that the photos are a hoax, but many ufologists continue to argue that the photos are genuine and show an unidentified object in the sky. The incident, although these images have become known as the McMinnville UFO photographs, Paul and Evelyn Trent, or Paul and Evelyn Trent's farm, was actually just outside of Sheridan, Oregon, approximately 9 miles southwest of McMinnville, which was the larger town. According to astronomer William K. Hartman's account, on 11 May 1950 at 7:30 p.m., Evelyn Trent was walking back to her farmhouse after feeding rabbits on her farm. Before reaching the house, she claimed to see a slow-moving metallic disc-shaped object heading in her direction from the northeast. She yelled for her husband, who was inside the house. Upon leaving the house, he claimed he also saw the object. After a short time, he went back inside their home to obtain a camera. He said he'd managed to take 2 photos of the object before he sped away to the west. Paul Trent's father claimed he briefly viewed the object before it flew away. Hartman's version of the incident traces back to an interview of the Trents gave to Lou Gillette, host of the radio station KMCM, later KLYC, and quoted the Oregonian newspaper on June 10, 1950. However, the Trents had given a slightly different version of the incident to the local McMinnville newspaper, the Telephone Register, 2 days earlier, on June 8, 1950. In that version, Evelyn Trent stated, "We'd been out in the backyard. Both of us saw the object at the same time. The camera, Paul, though it was in the car, or Paul thought it was in the car, but I was sure it was in the house. I was right. The Kodak was loaded with film." Initial publicity. The roll of film in Paul Trent's camera was not entirely used up, so Trent did not have the film developed immediately. The film was not developed until the remaining frames were used in shooting family photographs for Mother's Day. In 1997, in an interview, the Trents claimed that they initially thought the object they had photographed was a secret military aircraft and feared the photos might bring them trouble. When they mentioned his sighting and photographs to his banker, Frank Wortman, the banker was intrigued enough to display them from his bank window in McMinnville. Shortly afterwards, Bill Powell, a local reporter, convinced Mr. Trent to loan him the negatives. Powell examined the negatives and found no evidence that they were tampered with or faked. On June 8, 1950, Powell's story of the incident, accompanied by the 2 photos, was published as a front-page story in the McMinnville Telephone Register. The headline read, "At long last, authentic photographs of flying saucer." The story and photos were subsequently picked up by the International News Service (INS) and sent to other newspapers around the nation, thus giving them wide publicity. Life magazine published cropped versions of the photos in June 26, 1950, along with a photo of Trent and his camera. The Trents had been promised that the negatives would be returned to them. However, they were not returned. Life magazine told the Trents that it had misplaced the negatives. The Condon Committee investigation. In 1967, the negatives were found in the files of the United Press International (UPI), a news service which had merged with INS years later. The negatives were then loaned to Dr. William K. Hartman, an astronomer who was working as an investigator for the Condon Committee, a government-funded UFO research project based at the University of Colorado in Boulder. The Trents were not immediately informed that their lost negatives had been found. Hartman interviewed the Trents and was impressed by their sincerity. The Trents never received any money for their photos, and he could find no evidence that they had sought any fame or fortune from them. The Hartman's analysis, he wrote to the Condon Committee that this is one of the few UFO reports in which all factors investigated, geometric, psychological, and physical, appear to be consistent with the assertion that an extraordinary flying object, silver metallic, disc-shaped, tens of meters in diameter, evidently artificial, flew within sight of two witnesses. One reason for this conclusion was due to the photometric analysis of the images. Hartman noted that the brightness of the underside of the object appeared to be lighter than the underside of the oil tank seen in the images. This could be due to the effect of atmospheric extinction and scattering, the same effects that make distant mountains appear washed out in blue. This effect suggested the objects were further from the camera than the tank. Not small local objects. Hartman did, however, also point out the possibility that the images were manufactured. He noted that the object appears beneath a pair of wires, as seen in plates 23 and 24. We may question, therefore, where it could have been a model suspended from one of the wires. This possibility is strengthened by the observation that the object appears beneath roughly the same points in the two photos, in spite of their having been taken from two positions. That concludes these tests do not rule out the possibility that the object was a small model suspended from the nearby wire by an unresolved thread. Hartman also noticed a discrepancy that would later become the main point of objection for later skeptics. He noticed that the overall lighting of the image was consistent with the lighting that would be expected around sunset, but noted that there could be a possible discrepancy in view of the fact that the UFO, the telephone pole, possibly the garage at the left, and especially the distant house gables left of the distant barn are illuminated from the right or east. The house in particular appears to have a shadow under its roof that would suggest a daylit photo, and combined with the eastward incidence, one could argue that the photos were taken on a dull, sunlit day at 10 a.m. After Hartman concluded his investigation, he returned the negatives to UPI, which then informed the Trents about them. In 1970, the Trents asked Philip Bladine, the editor of the News Register, the successor of the Telephone Register, for the negatives. The Trents noted that they had never been paid for the negatives and thus wanted them back. Bladine asked UPI to return the negatives, which it did. However, for some reason, Bladine never told the Trents that the negatives had been returned. The McAbee analysis. In 1975, the negatives were found in the files of the News Register by Bruce McAbee, an optical physicist for the US Navy and a ufologist. After completing his own study of the photos, McAbee ensured that the photos were returned to the Trents. McAbee analyzed the photos and concluded that the photographs were not hoaxes and showed a real physical object in the sky above the Trent farm. Much of his analysis is based on densitometric measurements. Again, much of his analysis is based on densitometric measurements, similar to the photometric analysis done by Hartman. McAbee argued that the brightness of the object's underside suggested it was at some distance from the camera, not a smaller object close to it. McAbee also analyzed the position of various objects in the image, as well as an image prepared by Hartman when he visited the site in June 1967. Based on this, McAbee argued that the line of sight of the two images intersected some distance behind the power lines seen in the photos, providing further evidence in his position, or in his opinion, that it was not a small model suspended from the lines. McAbee stated that his analysis of the object did not find any evidence of a thread or string suspending it from the power lines. In reply to the skeptical arguments that shadow on objects in the photos proved that they were taken in the morning rather than in the early evening, as the Trents had claimed, McAbee argued that cloud conditions in the McMinnville area on the evening of the sighting could have caused the shadows on the garage. He also stated, in response to the IPACO skeptical photo analysis, that regarding their photogrammetric analysis, I showed that the sighting lines did not cross under the wires and did not refute this. I still stand on my original work. The hoax explanation. In the 1980s, Philip J. Klass and Robert Schaefer, journalists and notable skeptics, concluded that the photos were fake and that the entire event was a hoax. The primary argument was that shadows on a garage on the left hand side of the photos proved that the photos were taken in the morning rather than in the early evening, as the Trents had claimed. Klass and Schaefer argued that since the Trents had apparently lied about the time the photos were taken, their entire story was thus suspect. They also noted that the Trents had shown an interest in UFOs prior to their claimed sighting. Additionally, their analysis of the photos indicated that the object photographed was small and likely a model hanging from power lines visible at the top of the photos. They also believed the object may have been detached side view mirror, or may have been a detached side view mirror of a vehicle. The object was a shape that is very similar to the round mirrors that were used on Ford vehicles for decades, or similar models on almost all vehicles for the era. Additionally, Klass found a number of contradictions in the Trent's story of the sighting and noted that their version of the incident changed over the years. His conclusion was that the Trents had hoaxed the event. When Schaefer sent his research and conclusions to William Hartman, Hartman withdrew the positive assessment of the case he had sent to the Condon committee. In April 2013, 3 researchers with IPACO posted 2 studies to their website entitled Back on McMinnville Pictures. and evidence of a suspension thread. They argued that the geometry of the photograph is most consistent with a small model with a hollow bottom hanging from a wire suspended from the power lines above, and they stated that they had detected the presence of a thread above the object. Their conclusion was that the clear result of this study was that the McMinnville UFO was a model hanging from a thread. The aftermath. The McMinnville UFO photographs remain among the best publicized in UFO history. Skeptics continue to explain the two photographs as being hoaxes and/or fakes. Ufologists continue to argue that the Trent photos are credible evidence that UFOs are real physical phenomena. Evelyn Trent died in 1997 and Paul Trent in 1998. They both insisted to their deaths that their sighting and photos were genuine. The interest surrounding the Trent UFO photos led to an annual UFO festival being established in McMinnville. It is now the largest such gathering in the Pacific Northwest and is the second largest UFO festival in the nation after the one held in Roswell, New Mexico.